Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing Season 2 of Marvel and Netflix Punisher TV show. And then asking, is amnesia a valid excuse? If you're confused by that, then I'm sure all will be enlightened during the review section. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, since the last podcast, I have read most of another non-fiction book. This is I'm a Joke and So Are You, a comedian's take on what makes us human, by the comedian Robin Ince, who is, I think, best known for presenting The Infinite Monkey Cage on Radio 4, I think?
Yeah, with Brian Cox. That's where I know him from.
Yeah, as you may tell from my uncertain tone, I've never listened to The Infinite Monkey Cage, but I have seen him at a few mixed bill stand-up gigs, because I think he does quite a lot of organising those sort of big variety shows. And yeah, I bought this book because it was cheap on Kindle one day, and it promised an insight into what comedy says about us and how jokes actually work from a mental standpoint and how our brain relates to our inner lives. And yeah, it's actually really interesting. It is quite a light read, I guess. Robin Ince is not promising to explain to you in detail how your brain works. He's just talking partly from his own autobiographical perspective and partly by talking to other comedians about, how they relate to their creative side, whether they have like an inner voice that's constantly talking at them, how they deal with how other people relate to their jokes, obvious stuff like their comedy persona, and there's some general stuff about being a creative and where ideas theoretically come from. Famous for being the most boring question you could possibly ask a creative, but that chapter is actually quite good. So yeah, it's an interesting book. It's a fun popular science book. He's got a good range of comedians you've vaguely heard of. He's got Alan Moore. Everything on this show can be somehow tied back to comics.
Is it written in a funny way? Or is it just more of a trying to be a serious book, in inverted commas?
It's written in a sort of serious but likeable way. There's a joke every so often, but he's not constantly trying to crack you up. But it is written in the first person. It is him talking about him rather than putting on some academic voice. And yeah, he comes across as a likeable dude, and every so often there's a good joke, but it's not like constantly trying to crack you up.
That sounds good. I mean, it sounds like a really interesting idea for a book, kind of really digging into like how humor works and things like that. It's something I've always been sort of interested to know more about. Although I will partly be concerned by that. There was that old Spike Milligan quote, was it? That explaining a joke or something, explaining humour is like dissecting a frog. No one laughs and the frog dies.
Well, yeah, and if you subscribe to that quote, I would not recommend reading Stuart Lee's Brick-like book, How I Escaped My Certain Death, or How I Escaped My Certain Fate, I think, which is just a punishing dissection of his jokes. But this is more about how we as a conscious being relate to humour and jokes, rather than how jokes work or why they're funny.
Yeah, it does sound really interesting. And I guess, yeah, Robin Ince being he's got sort of science-y persona from his Radio 4 show, and also is a funny comedian who's probably the perfect guy to explain humour.
Yeah, but I've not listened to the Radio 4 show, although I probably should. Know a lot of people who like it. I assume the idea is that Brian Cox is the clever one and he's the relatable one.
Yeah, we ask the every person questions. It was very popular, certainly like a few years ago. I'm sure it still is very popular, but kind of when podcasts really kind of broke the mainstream, and it was like a narrower field, and the BBC was very dominant for a while because they could obviously just take popular radio shows and just instantly put them out as a podcast, and they had big names and things like that. So I think it was one of those things that like really found favour as the podcast during podcast's early sort of popular explosion.
I assume it's still going, but I don't even know that. But yeah, this by itself, it's not a tired book or anything. Brian Cox has not yet turned up, although there's still time. I've still got a couple of chapters left. So yeah, this just by itself, it's an interesting book, has a bit of sort of fun popular science. I say this as somebody who knows nothing about the subject, but I don't feel like I'm being patronised. So yeah, worth a go.
Sounds good.
Anyway, what have you been consuming?
I've been watching a new show from Netflix called Russian Doll, starring Natasha Lyonne, who people may remember as Nikki in Orange is the New Black. So, and yeah, it's a really interesting, I guess you'd say it's a dark comedy. It's one of those shows that's kind of hard to put into a neat box in that, yeah, it's certainly dark, and all the episodes are kind of 20-minute sort of comedy length. And there is sort of sense of dark humour, but also it's quite sort of tragic and dramatic. It begins with this woman at her 36th birthday party, a sort of cynical, hard-smoking, hard-drinking, drug-taking New Yorker woman played by Natasha Lyonne. And then she goes out to look for her cat because she's fed up with her party and gets hit by a car and then wakes up back at the party. And then she's sort of trapped in this loop going round and round, constantly dying and then constantly going back to this party. So obviously, yeah, there's some excellent moments of black comedy and some sort of slapstick deaths. But after a while, it was something quite tragic about it. And then it sort of digs into the character and her childhood, and does go to some quite dark places, and there are some quite creepy bits as well. So yeah, it's good so far.
Okay. Remember when we covered Fleabag back in the day, I coined the term sadcom whilst writing up the show notes. Is this a sadcom?
You could file it under sadcom. It's got that sort of Fleabag type thing when, like, it's funny, but it's not quite like, I don't know, it's difficult to say. Because, like, Fleabag has got this kind of depressing sort of, emotional side to it, that you could tell that she's, like, clearly someone with a lot of mental health problems underneath the comedy. And I guess although the character in Russian Doll clearly does have, like, kind of problems resulting from her childhood, a lot of the darkness also comes from the fact that, like, she keeps dying, sometimes in quite violent or horrible ways. It's kind of a dark sadcom. I don't know. But yeah, I think probably sadcom is a good description.
Yeah, it's on the list because it's been rapturously received by Twitter, so I will probably watch it at some stage, probably after I finish the series of The Office that I'm currently watching. I've got about 5 episodes left of Friends, which I will be... Friends? Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, I'm confusing my phenomenally popular, went into nearly 10 seasons US sitcoms there. I've got about 5 more episodes of the current season of The Office, and then I was going to watch something else as a break. So that something else may very well be Russian Doll, I think.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Natasha Lyonne is great. The supporting cast is excellent. It's very well written and very funny. There's lots of nice sort of studied observations of millennial life, in inverted commas. And it goes down quite easily because it's only 8 20-minute episodes. So I think I remember I sat down and think, well, I'll just watch the first one of these just to see what, like, all the buzz is about, thinking there'd be, like, sort of 45-minute kind of standard TV drama length. And then I ended up just watching the first 3 kind of back to back. And they always end with, like, a good twist or punch out that gets you onto the next one. Yeah, I would recommend this. Yeah, if you're seeing the buzz is accurate this time.
Okay, well, by next episode I may very well have seen it, though I'd feel guilty reusing it for this section, so let's just probably assume I'll probably enjoy it. It sounds like very, very much my sort of thing.
I'd be very surprised if you didn't think it was good.
Okay, and our main review item of this episode. It's time to talk about Season 2 of The Punisher. This, of course, is the Marvel Netflix Defenderverse show, which debuted a few weeks back, continuing to follow former Marine Frank Castle, played by John Bernthal, as he launches a one-man war on the streets by wearing a skull t-shirt and mowing down criminals with probably quite ludicrously overdone assault weaponry. And yeah, in the previous season, as a matter of fact, which we did cover back in MFV 51, where we rather liked it, I think. We possibly more than the general consensus, actually. I think we concluded, although it's maybe it's a bit Netflixually slow, but overall it was a decent drama. So, what did we think of Season 2? Alistair, tell us.
Well, I'm going to get the obvious criticism out of the way, which is I did feel this was a slow-paced Netflix superhero show, much like almost all the others we reviewed, in that there's the obvious, it was a bit slow in the middle and it could have been shorter to make the pacing better. But we say that every time, so I'm going to skip over that quickly, which is that there were bits of this that I did really like. I really liked the beginning, the first sort of 3 or so episodes set in rural Ohio, which I thought was like a sort of different change of scene, introduced some new characters. It was, interesting to see the Punisher in a different environment. There was, in the first episode, an exceptionally brutal fight scene in a bar, which starts in a bar toilet and then kind of escalates to consume the whole bar, that I thought was really good, sort of strong opening to the series. And then it lost me a bit as it went along, because the plot that kind of begins in Ohio became very much the second fiddle plot to the return of Billy Russo, the villain from the first series. Although Billy Russo isn't a terrible villain, overall I just felt a lot less invested in his plot and kind of felt that I would have preferred less of that and more of the plot line that begins in Ohio when Castle discovers a teenage girl in danger and they have a sort of surrogate father-daughter relationship, and he has to protect her from this character John, who's a sort of Bible-quoting, kind of massacring, evil Punisher, I guess, on a mission to kill first her and then her and Castle. And I kind of preferred that plotline to Billy, and I kind of lost interest a bit as it went on and it became a more of a Billy-focused series. The end was all right. It pulled me back at the end, but I kind of felt that I would have preferred a different show that they almost made.
Mostly agree with you, yeah. I remember when we covered Season 1, I said it was very close to being a bit of a generic Revenge Man show, but the combination of, the performances, the fact that it was plotted reasonably tightly, and the fact that it actually made an effort to say something about veterans and trauma and stuff kind of made it work. But I guess the trouble with skating by on execution like that is that, yeah, the execution faltered a bit on this series, and therefore it did kind of lapse a bit back into being a slightly generic violent crime show with really, really, really slow pacing. Like, as Alistair said, it's not a particularly hot take to say that these Netflix Marvel shows are quite slow paced, but for the record, even by Netflix Marvel standards, this was at times very slow. I think I often say these could stand to lose a third. I always think this could have stood to lose almost a half, to be honest. But yeah, it's very slow, and in basically every episode, there's some stuff. There's either a really good dramatic scene or a really good fight that makes me think, oh yeah, this is why I like this show. But unfortunately, there's also nearly always something that makes me go, oh god. Which is sometimes the plotline with Billy Russo. But I'm gonna have to spoil it. Sorry. If you care enough about what happens in Punisher season 2, It's been nearly a month. Let's hope you've seen it. There's a plotline involving Billy Russo and his therapist, played by Floriana Lima, who was in Supergirl, playing, to be honest, a much better written part. And she's sort of being played as a evil, manipulative TV psychologist, but she's also this sort of messed up little girl who's in love with Billy Russo, and the two seem quite separate, and the character seems quite badly written, and basically every scene with her in it, with a couple of exceptions, was kind of bad. And she unfortunately does play a mid-sized role right up to the end, so that didn't really help. I didn't dislike the Billy Russo storyline as much as it sounds like Alistair did. I felt like it still had a certain amount of clout, but probably they should have let him sit for a year, basically pull the Kingpin and let us do without him for a year, then brought him back in season 3, because I did feel that bringing him back straight after he was last in it did run the risk of just feeling a bit samey, which at times it kind of did. And as we'll get to more probably in the second section, they've given him amnesia, which did lead to a couple of touching moments where he discovered that his friend Frank had betrayed him. As far as he knew, they were still friends, but of course they're not friends, and Frank smashed his face repeatedly into a glass pane at the end of the last series. But all in all, it did just kind of feel like it was a way of stalling to drag out the quite slow pacing.
Yeah, and they could have made the character more interesting, especially like they started off with him wearing the mask, this weird mask, because he's been sort of facially scarred quite bad after, his face gets repeatedly smacked and then rubbed into a pane of glass, which was a really viscerally violent moment at the end of series 1.
Also, kudos to his reconstructive surgeons who have done an impressive job of putting his face back together, considering that at the end of season 1, it was just a mask of bloody flesh.
Yeah, and he's still pretty good looking.
I know, he's pretty good looking. He's still got a quite nicely manicured goatee. He's just got these sort of spidery scars circling around his face. It's like, is that realistic? I mean, I guess you don't want to have him looking like cartoonishly deformed in a Deadpoolish way, because this is a serious comic show. But still, I feel like, especially considering how much it's meant to have messed him up, you could have gone a bit further with the disfigurement.
Yeah, I would have preferred if they just kept the mask, because in the first couple of episodes he's wearing a mask. And I thought it'd be quite good if he just wears the mask throughout and you never see what it looks like underneath, and it's left to the audience to think, God, it must be like horrendous under there, because I think his face was like smashed into a wall of glass several times. And for whatever reason they decided not to go with the mask, maybe because they thought it was silly, maybe because they thought we've got quite a good actor and we want him to do some acting and he would be able to do it behind a mask. Or maybe they thought people might not remember or recognise the character if he wears the mask throughout. So the mask is ditched quite early on, apart from for a couple of reappearances, such as when he robs a bank, he wears the mask. But I kind of felt they could have done something more with that, transforming the character a bit more in that, again, having him become like a whole other sort of being with a different physicality and even a different outward appearance. Whereas what they kind of go for is he mopes around for a bit, complains that he can't remember things for a bit, and then takes off the mask and basically goes back to normal, just with occasional moments of saying, I don't remember stuff, and then goes back to being a regular villain. And I also thought even though they kind of try to build up that he's been psychologically scarred in some way from this, I kind of felt that you would be more messed up to receive such trauma, rather than just become a bit grumpy. And also, the first few episodes between when he's wearing the mask and when he's having quite severe therapy from the character you just mentioned, they're trying to get across that, Billy's been really fucked up by what happened to him. But after a couple of episodes, he's basically back to normal, other than he, has the odd psychological twitch, has these scars over his still very neatly chiseled face, and occasionally sort of acts a bit more villainy than he did before. But I kind of felt that he bounces back to being the same old Billy pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, in Series 1, he was the slick businessman who, until about 3 episodes before the end, we weren't meant to think was a villain. And in fairness to them, I didn't fully twig he was a villain until quite close to when they told me, so fair enough on that twist in season 1, I suppose. But yeah, in season 2, they don't seem to have much idea what to do with him, other than once they get past him breaking out of the hospital, other than the classic Netflix Marvel villain act of setting up a low-end gang in a warehouse with some random dudes.
Yeah.
There's a vague attempt to make it feel like he's putting together like a small army, or he's trying to help some veterans, or which is obviously very on theme for the Punisher, or he's trying to rebuild, what he had before, because he used to run, was it Anvil, a military contractor?
He had like a private army company, basically.
Yeah, and you meant to get a vague sense he's trying to rebuild that, but ultimately it is just another Netflix Marvel villain who's set up in a warehouse with generic thugs 1 through 7.
And I think there's a bit when he's sort of starting to build his network, when it's the closest this series comes to trying to say anything, which is that, the fact that there's a lot of veterans who feel rejected by the military, or kind of they were like sort of unceremoniously shoved out the door and looking for something, in their lives when their military careers come to end, who possibly been sort of mentally disturbed by what they went through. And we do have a problem in society of what to do with ex-military people, especially in America. There's quite a lot of them, and they're not really given a great sort of lot in life after they leave the army, which is something they tried to get to in the first series. And then when Billy Rousseau's recruiting his gang of sort of emotionally scarred military castaways, that's kind of the closest when it comes to saying anything. But one thing I did feel about this series, which is what you sort of talked about before, which the first series was better, is the first series had more of an attempt to engage with ideas like, is vigilante justice good or bad? Does it have a role in society? What happens when traditional justice doesn't get the quote-unquote bad guys, or people are left feeling let down by the system? Is the Punisher really doing good, or is he just kind of feeding some kind of violent urge inside him? There's an attempt to grapple with some of those. Although they're not entirely absent from Series 2, I feel they're very much played down, which made it a less interesting series. There was sort of an element of like, okay, so we did the big questions in the first series. We don't want to repeat them or just start repeating ourselves. But they didn't really have anything to take its place, or anything interesting to say. So I kind of felt they ran out of stuff to say after the first series.
To be honest, the big problem with this series is a lot of the time it felt like a slightly less good version of Season 1, and a lot of the stuff that wasn't in Season 1, I don't know, didn't entirely come together for me. Like, as I say, they had a non-Billy storyline, which is the one you talked about, with this girl he's trying to protect from this religious or religion-themed assassin called John Pilgrim, which I felt was a little generic. I don't really know. That really never really came together for me. I preferred the Billy Russo stuff, if only because it felt a bit more defined, even if it was also a bit of a rerun of last series. But the John Pilgrim, Amy stuff, although there were some nice fatherly, daughterly moments between Amy and Frank, the actual storyline just sort of shuffled along, not helped by the fact that they completely failed to integrate it with the Billy storyline. Every episode was either doing the Amy storyline or doing the Billy storyline, and the other storyline was just sort of booted to a couple of side scenes while the other storyline went on, and as a result it felt massively disjointed.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
I think basically they wanted to fully engage with the Amy storyline for a bit, then fully engage with the Billy storyline, and then come back to the Amy storyline. But because they ended up spending about 7 episodes on the Billy storyline, and then wrapping up the Amy one in about 2 episodes at the end, it didn't really feel like it works out the same. If they really wanted to do that, I'd have suggested maybe just doing the Amy storyline in the first 6 episodes, and then the Billy storyline in the second, maybe? Except that they don't have any threads to make them coexist, because this approach did not really work.
I think that would have worked better, partly because it would have given Billy longer to recover from what happened to him, rather than him bouncing back within about 2 episodes of having, like I say, his face smashed through a glass pane. Yeah, I think that would have worked better, and it is ridiculous that the 2 plot lines kind of didn't really overlap at all, other than the fact they both contain Frank Castle. That's basically it. I was waiting for the moment when it all tied together, especially when I got into like the sort of the penultimate episode. I thought there's going to be a bit when this all like ties up. Like, I don't know, even if it's something as straightforward as the Punisher's 2 big villains are going to unite to bring him down, or something like that. But
or one's about to kill him when the other one, I don't know, somehow inadvertently saves him or something.
Yeah, or does he have to do some weird thing like, he has to team up with John to bring down Rousseau because Rousseau kidnaps Amy or something like that. There's loads of ways this could have gone, and they just didn't. Because, it just didn't work, yeah.
I quite liked how they handled both storylines in the final episode. It vaguely worked for me that him and John had this bloody fight, which, again, was quite good. If there's one thing they could do in this show, it's a fight.
Yeah.
And Billy just got shot by Agent Madani in the very, very opening minutes of the episode, and then just spent the entire episode slowly and sadly bleeding out until Frank just walked up to him and shot him.
Yeah.
It worked. It conveyed the right kind of sadness, and it said a lot about Frank's character. But, again, the 2 are completely separate.
you're right, the ending was good, but I always feel with the Marvel Netflix shows, the ending is usually always good. It's just there's always like the pacing is the issue. They're clever enough to sit on their good stuff right to the end, but it's just the pacing of padding it out to 13 episodes. Yeah, this would have been a very, very tight 8-episode show. They could have, yeah, like especially like the John storyline that I was certainly more into, the John and Amy storyline that I was certainly more into in the beginning. It does get paused pretty much through the middle of the show when they build up Rousseau and his gang. Other than John will occasionally go somewhere and interrogate someone, yeah, it's really not on the radar, which is one of the reasons why I think the series lost me as it went along, because that plot was so slow paced, it pretty much came to cardiac arrest. But I thought the opening, like 2 or 3 episodes, were really tight and really good. Like, there were some great scenes, like there was a siege in a rural police station when, Castle, funny enough, gets arrested because you can't, like, shoot up a bar and, like, I don't know, kill 5 or 6 people and then, like, hide out in a motel when there's another big shootout without the police noticing. And then he gets arrested, and then him and Amy are arrested, and John and his inexhaustible army of heavies, which I'm not really sure where they come from, come to attack the police station, and there's, like, a siege. And so there's some good stuff early on, especially in the first episode when I know the Punisher's given some redeeming moments and maybe even a glimpse of happiness that I thought was like, an interesting direction. And then, like I say, there was a very good fight in the first episode, and I kind of wanted them to do the Punisher meets Winter's Bone. Basically, like, the Punisher knocks around rural blue-collar America dealing with people selling crystal meth and opioids, I don't know, and in sort of decaying Rust Belt towns. And obviously some very angry Southern Baptists with a lot of guns. That was what I was thought, like, okay, this is different. They're doing something new here. At least it's, they're doing something new with the character. It's an interesting new plot. It also shows that, like, crime in America isn't just limited to a few blocks in downtown Brooklyn. But by the end of the 3rd episode, he's on a helicopter back to New York, and we're back to the same old Punisher. So I found that was quite disappointing.
Yeah, although there were a couple of big action episodes during the Billy storyline that I also enjoyed, like the one where he and Curtis lay siege to that warehouse, which I found quite an enjoyable action episode.
Yeah, as you say, they could do a good fight. Like the one when, in order to confuse the Punisher, Billy Rousseau, he turns the lights on and off. There's a scene that's like kind of interspersed sudden blasts of light and shooting and then darkness, and that was quite good. And I also thought that the bank robbery scene, kind of, which is like the big set piece right in the middle of Series 2, was good. I mean, yeah, they could do a good action scene, it's all kind of poorly paced.
Yeah, there's also the like 1 or 2 token moments we get during every season where the Punisher actually wears the Punisher costume and looks like the Punisher. Maybe that's just my inner superhero fan screaming from inside his cage, but part of me still wishes that we didn't go through whole seasons of the Punisher and only see him being the Punisher about once per year. Well, twice if you count like the last few seconds of the series.
Yeah.
Although, much as I liked the warehouse fight, it did then lead into the other bit I've really set aside to complain about for a couple of minutes, which was there's a bit where Frank, having been, beaten and shot a few times, I think with rubber bullets it turns out, but still, and generally driven into a bit of a blind rage, just strafes this whole warehouse with machine gun fire, and then runs into one of the adjoining officey bits and finds a bunch of dead women who have all been shot to bits, and has like a mini breakdown because he thinks he's accidentally killed some bystanders. It was a good ending to a good episode. But in the next episode, Karen Page turns up to pull what may well be her last appearance in the role, and sadly it wasn't great. And spends the entire episode proving that Frank didn't kill these random women because Billy actually killed them and left them there to mess with him as part of his complex villain plan, which involved tricking Frank into getting angry and shooting a lot so that he could shoot at these women, or think he shot these women. Now, firstly, that's a villain plan which involves a level of foresight which seems slightly ridiculous, and secondly, I don't really understand why it's effective to do that for the Punisher, a man who does routinely strafe whole rooms with machine gun fire.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weak episode. And it also has the classic ridiculous villain moment when they've beaten up the Punisher, he's lying on the floor, Billy Russo standing over him, and I was just going, just shoot him. Like, stop with your clever, because it's going to backfire. Like, you've beaten him, just shoot him. Like, why don't you... It's like it's that bit in Austin Powers, with when Seth Green was like, I've got a gun in my room, we'll just shoot him right now. And then Dr. D was like, no, begin the unnecessarily slow dipping process. And it's like, kind of, Billy Russo was like, no, begin the unnecessarily slow psychological torture bit so that he can come back and kill me later. I can see where they were going, but it's one of those things that, like, this is supposed to be like a believable vigilante show. Maybe they could have got it into something like Iron Fist. But no, like, Iron Fist obviously not fond of, like, spraying a room full of bullets. But I can imagine it would work with something that's, A bit more ridiculous, like Iron Fist, and B, someone who's more likely just to mope about, I thought I was a good guy, but maybe I'm actually a bad guy. When the Punisher is generally just fond of spraying rooms full of bullets with doing his weird kind of manly grunt he does when he kills lots of people.
But that's the thing, the Punisher...
That's the point in the Punisher.
The Punisher is meant to be... I think you have to just assume the Punisher's made his peace with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess maybe this is still, relatively speaking, a quite early in career Punisher, and maybe this would have been one of the first times he'd accidentally killed a bystander. I guess that's something he has to process. But still, it would be more interesting to see him actually process that, rather than irritatingly reveal it was a trick.
Yeah, that's There you go ahead.
I think I've pretty much made my fucking point. I don't know whether this is the cloying hand of Mickey Mouse saying, no, we can't have someone who, as the hero, who would just shoot up a whole room full of random people. But, but also have removed the unbelievable aspects, because if he just shot them by accident, Billy Russo wouldn't have had to let him live. Anyway, that bit just annoyed me. A nice typical example of TV show teases a more interesting story and then does a twist reveal that it's actually a less interesting story.
Yeah, and also I thought it was kind of against the Punisher's nature. The Punisher is usually damns everyone by association. His standard of morality is like insanely high. That I thought he was the sort of person who would assume you guilty by association. If you're hanging out with a load of criminals, then you're also a criminal and deserve punishment. Or gunishment, as it frequently is. Oh. I'm going to keep vlogging that Chris Morris joke.
It's okay. This show's almost definitely going to be cancelled soon.
Yeah.
We probably won't ever need to cover it again.
But the other thing about this is that it's kind of my general complaint about the show is that like every interesting thing they set up, they kind of just deal with like alarmingly quickly. The Punisher has a moment of introspection, like, am I really a bad guy? Moment like lasts for barely one episode. Billy Russo, bears saying again, has his face put through a sheet of glass, and 2 episodes later, he's basically like, well, I'm a little miffed about this, but other than that, I'm basically fine. Various other things like that. This show he sets stuff up and deals with it too quickly, and I know I complained about the pacing, and I didn't want 3 episodes of the Punisher lying in bed moping about the fact that he thinks he's maybe a bad guy now, but they should have maybe chosen one of these things and kind of gone with it. Like, for example, the last series of Daredevil, which we quite liked, they made quite a big deal out of the fact that Daredevil thinks Matt Murdock basically no longer exists and he's purely, the devil of Hell's Kitchen and he wants to live an isolated life and he's feeling quite psychologically tormented by what happened to him. That is like the major thrust of the series, but they take ideas that could have worked as well as that did and kind of do them in like 1 to 2 episodes. And then have lots of them. I really felt they should have decided what they wanted the main psychological thrust to be with this, and then kind of pace that better throughout.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a bit disjointed. It's a winning combination of going through ideas too quickly and being a bit too slow.
Yeah.
It's like, well done, lads, you've fallen down both holes at once.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Also, there was a weird scene at the end where, at the very, very end, so again, I'm going to spoil literally the last few minutes of the season now, where Frank, a few months after the plot has basically finished, is just wandering around shooting random gangsters while screaming a lot in quite a fuck yeah, I'm a badass way. And it's like, the entire theme of the show, even in some of the less good bits, have been, let's slow down and think about this. Is it actually good to be the Punisher? It's a bit weird to then end what will probably be the entire series on this note of, killing gangsters, fuck yeah! I mean, I don't know. Maybe at that point they knew it was cancelled and just thought they'd give the comic fans a little moment of joy. But yeah, it felt a bit strange to me.
I assumed that was them basically saying, look, this is probably going to be cancelled. So we're going to finish with the Punisher being the Punisher so that if they never make any more episodes of this, that is the equilibrium point they leave it at. Just as they let Daredevil Series 3 at the point of the classic lineups back together, Nelson, Page and Murdoch, and they're going to carry on lawyering together. This, leaves Frank Castle being Frank Castle. He's going to continue punishing forever, and you can just kind of imagine that. But also, I guess, with, at the end, Madani joining the CIA, they kind of leave it open. If they do a Series 3, I guess that is the thread they're going to pick up. I guess Madani gets Castle into the CIA, and maybe it's going to be The Punisher, Far From Home, Series 3.
Yeah, there are comic storylines you can do for that. There are actually a few quite good Garth Ennis storylines where the Punisher is recruited to do, like, hardcore wet work. It's like, we need to kill literally loads of people. Who's good for this? But yeah.
Yeah, I know a guy. Fond of skulls and shooting 2 guns at once.
Yeah, there's also a hint that the therapist character might come back as a villain Obviously, I hope that never happens. Or at least I hope if she does, she has much better writing, because she didn't interest me.
Yeah.
But still, John Bernthal as the Punisher, despite every mildly critical thing we've said about this season, I still think that if the Netflix Marvel experiment is about to collapse, which, as we discussed before, it looks like it probably is, the big loss in terms of acting, even though all the leads except maybe Iron Fist are good, will, I think, for me, be John Bernthal as the Punisher. I think he embodies the character to a Chris Evans as Captain America type way. I think it will be a shame if we lose him.
Yeah, his performance is exceptional. And I did like in this series, they gave him the father-daughter relationship with Amy, which allowed him to show some of an emotional range. Because, yeah, his emotional range in the last series was limited very much to grief and rage. Whereas in this, there's a sort of window into redemption, which I thought was interesting. And you can kind of see, the fact that he was a good parent and things like that, which is why the source of his rage aimed at the world. So, yeah, it is an exceptional performance, which is, again, one of the things why I kind of liked the first few episodes when it's just Amy and the Punisher knocking around, having their sort of adversarial but also camaraderie relationship.
Yeah, there's a very good Punisher dad moment in one of the episodes where Amy has had to shoot someone in the gut in self-defense and he's on the floor, probably dying. And she's very much, I killed him. And the Punisher just turns around and just shoots him casually in the head and goes, there you go, I killed him.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's fine. And she just stares at him in this, what the fuck? kind of way. It's like, yes, that's the Punisher as dad moment that I want. It's both weirdly touching but also clearly insane.
Yeah. One weird thing about this show, especially this series, it's a very gory show and lots of people get shot. But this show is also as into the gore of bullets coming out of people as it is into the gore of bullets going into people. There are loads of scenes of people basically using tweezers to pull bullets out of themselves or each other. Like the Punisher and Amy, they have their first kind of team-up experience in the motel after the Punisher saves her in the huge bar fight at the beginning.
But she pulls a bullet out of his arse.
Yeah, out of his arse, yeah. And also what I did like about that scene is she actually washes her hands before she performs surgery, which I thought, yeah, that's sensible, and I'm glad they got that in there. Yeah, don't pull a bullet out of someone without washing your hands first. And then there's a bit when John gets, I think, shot by Amy with a shotgun, or possibly by Frank. And then there's a gruesome scene of him removing all the pellets from his leg, which is pretty rank. Rousseau in the last series tries to get himself patched up by an alcoholic doctor. So they really love the kind of gruesome screaming bit of someone having a bullet pulled out of their gut and then stitched up, usually being sterilised with a bottle of whiskey, which I'm pretty sure only makes things worse. But yeah.
It's a part of their commitment to realism.
Yeah.
Showing bullets coming out of people as they scream.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's a Disney directive. You have to somehow show that bullets and shooting are bad.
Yeah. Well, I do like the idea they have basically, people get shot and they get glancing shots, even though I'm pretty sure the gut shot that the Punisher gets would have finished him off. Unless you're very, very, very lucky that he didn't hit any major internal organs, or arteries, or veins, or crucial bits of muscle. That at least would prevent him from walking for several months. But anyway, I like the fact that when bullets go into people, they're you can't just be oh, shrug it off. It requires surgery. The bullet has to come out. You have to be stitched up. There's a lot of blood. It's painful. Especially for some reason, everyone's really against the idea of anesthesia, even local anesthesia. Anyway, they do love the kind of grunty the Punisher making his masculine kind of grunt noise as someone pulls a bullet out of him, or other characters.
Yeah. I don't know whether there was a degree of self-parody or catharsis in the final episode where Billy gets screwed over because he refuses anaesthetic because he's such a badass, and then basically passes out from the agony, and Doctor just leaves him in a bin.
Yeah.
Takes his money and leaves him in a bin. So yes, okay. See, this is the other great Disney moral lesson. Don't refuse anaesthetic when you're having a grimy underground surgery job after being shot by not the Punisher, a Homeland Security agent.
I'm glad that Disney are imparting to young people these important life lessons. They're taking on their mantle to educate as well as entertain very seriously.
Yeah, don't shoot bystanders and try not to get shot yourself. It's a code that the children can take into the world. Okay, and for our follow-up question on The Punisher Season 2, villain Billy Russo, of course, returns from his traumatic experience at the end of Season 1, having lost his memory and unable to remember his horrific crimes. But The Punisher, of course, being a show with a bit of a strict moral code, he pretty much still has to die anyway. But is amnesia a valid excuse? If you are a supervillain and you somehow forget your crimes, should you then be allowed to go off and live a normal life if you live outside the strict morality of the Punisher? Alistair, what do you think?
Amnesia is a trope that's used in fiction, especially TV and film, quite a lot for the purposes of advancing plot. as it is used here. And a lot of the way they use amnesia, which I believe is not really how amnesia works in real life, is that kind of get the idea that someone loses their memories and becomes like a different person. So the idea they're getting at here is that this Billy Rousseau is a different Billy Rousseau to the one who was responsible for the murder of Castle's family, amongst other things, thus creating the Punisher. The key question is, if he's a different person, is he responsible for the actions of that previous Billy Russo? So that's what we're kind of getting at here. I mean, I guess in the kind of morality of the Punisher universe, you're still responsible for everything you did, or even anything you might be tangentially associated to.
If you're seen being too friendly with a criminal, then Frank can probably shoot you.
Yeah, and also Frank doesn't make a distinction between, say, someone who pulls the trigger and someone who, orders the killing. For example, I was only following orders I don't think is a valid excuse in the Punisher universe, but also, while I never actually killed someone, I just stand behind the desk and shuffle some paperwork around.
Yeah, there will be a scene after the fight where Frank turns up in your office and shoots the shit out of you.
Yeah, exactly. So being like a horrendous desk murderer is not a valid excuse in the Punisher universe. So based on that logic, I think forgetting what you did isn't a valid excuse because you still did it. And I guess they haven't introduced time travel yet to the Punisher or the Defenders universe, and he can't go back in time and punish Billy before he forgot.
Well, he did give it a good go, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming it's meant to be an ironic twist. He left Billy alive so he could live with it, and Billy proceeded to immediately forget.
Yeah. I assume that's the reason why the Punisher didn't kill him, because the Punisher kills everyone. Billy's crime was so great, he had to live with the consequences rather than just be punished.
To be honest, folks, it was a bit of a slightly ropey excuse to bring him back for Season 2, to have the Punisher decide not to kill the main villain.
Yeah.
Despite it being his principal character move.
His raison d'etre.
Yeah. It was also a bit odd, to be honest, that he didn't kill John at the end, although I guess the fact he was doing it for his kids is meant to tie into the Punisher's obvious core motivation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and in that case, actually, I guess the Punisher did, for once, find it in his heart to forgive John, because he assumed that even though John killed a lot of people, John is not responsible for his actions because he's doing it to save his kids.
Yeah, considering this is a guy who marches into warehouses and blows away huge amounts of people from just standing near some gangsters.
It was quite the reverse.
Yeah, he's really changed his ethical stance there. I mean, obviously the Punisher is a lunatic and basically a serial killer whose approach just happens to roughly align with traditional morality, so it's probably best not to lean too much into what would Frank do when considering your approach to ethics.
I guess he feels that if someone held a gun to someone's head and then said to that person, you have to kill this other person, maybe he would consider that to be an excuse. Like, for example, there's one of the Saw movies, which average out to be quite bad overall, but anyway, I think it's Saw 4. One of the points when they really should have given up by this point. But anyway, there's as usual, there's two people. They're trapped in some kind of horrendous death machine trying to figure their way out. And the whole time, the kind of mechanism of this death machine is being overseen by this third person who you're supposed to think is the new Jigsaw, because Jigsaw dies in the third one. Anyway, so there's this guy, and then it's revealed at one point that this guy who's running around maintaining all the death machines and has a machine strapped to the back of his neck that has a giant spike pointed at the base of his brain, and he's not actually the villain. He's just another person caught in the machinations of the Jigsaw or whatever, and he's obviously forced to administer the death machines to these other characters, because if he doesn't, the spike goes through the back of his brain. First makes you think oh, that guy innocent? I mean, he still kills people or is involved in the process of killing people, but then again, he's been trapped as well. So if you introduce the Punisher to the Saw universe for maximum goriness, would the Punisher consider this character, whose name escapes me, as an innocent because he was forced to do what he did by Jigsaw's spiky device in the back of his head?
I don't know. If the Punisher operated on a pure deaths in, deaths out system, then you'd think the Punisher would say, well, you should probably have accepted your one death rather than causing the deaths of more than one person.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if the Punisher does work on that level of strict maths. I mean, John Pilgrim killed a number of people, and yet was still apparently allowed to go because he had children. So
yeah. Well, I assume the children thing is the equivalent of having the spike point at the back of your brain. You're not, at that point, you're no longer responsible for your own actions. Possibly. I don't know. Maybe there is a degree you can't over-interrogate the logic of the Punisher.
Or you just accept, as I say, Frank Castle is insane, and the logic of the Punisher basically depends on his mood that day.
Yeah, but I think all this is related to the core question of, is this a new Billy? And, is he responsible for the actions of the previous Billy? To what degree are you responsible for your own actions, and what degree should you be punished for them?
Wasn't Amnesiac Billy, he wasn't a new character, was he? He was meant to be past Billy. He still had the memories of Billy
Yeah.
at some point in the past. So
But they don't dig into it in a huge amount of detail.
past Billy presumably would still grow up, air quotes, to become adult evil Billy. So it's still the same person, really.
Yeah, and also in order to scoot around anything that could be philosophically interesting or, a decent point of debate in the second series, new Billy with no memories goes out and commits a lot of crime.
Yeah.
So
They're not really scooting around, is this a new Billy who could be redeemed, are they? There's
No.
there's very little point at which new Billy seems like he might maybe not deserve punishment.
yeah, in many ways, the Punisher doesn't have to wrestle with the awkward moral point that is new Billy responsible for the crimes of old Billy, because new Billy is definitely responsible for the crimes of new Billy. So the Punisher can punish him anyway.
Yeah, he's definitely gone out and robbed that bank by the time
Yeah,
the Punisher even shows up, hasn't he? So yeah, I think
they commit several crimes, and I think he shoots.
Yeah.
I think he shoots several people, or at least goes to town on them in a big way.
yeah, perhaps it's harder to see amnesia as a valid excuse on a show like The Punisher, where the crimes are pretty grisly, where the crimes generally involve shooting or beating or generally doing horrendous things to other people's bodies. Whereas on some shows where the crimes are a bit more vague and involve more sort of general supervillainy or waving energy bolts around or something, maybe it's easier to sell a storyline where a character gets amnesia and is redeemed and just wanders off to start their new life. It's like, well, he wasn't really a evil person, he was just the bad guy.
Yeah, he just wanted to steal the mind control machine.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not drill too hard into what he wanted to do to who when he had it.
Yeah.
But, he seems okay now. He hasn't killed anyone lately. At least until the plot twist where he turns out to have been faking his amnesia.
Yeah, or he gets hit in the head again and just goes back to exactly who he was before.
I think one of the seasons of iZombie, they had a plotline where the main villain got amnesia, as it did seem to just be a way of stretching out his involvement in the show. I mean, iZombie's quite a silly, light show, again, even though that guy had also killed a bunch of people. To be honest, even within iZombie, there was a certain amount of cognitive dissonance between the fact that this character was now everyone's friend, having been gleefully murdering in the previous season. Much like the way amnesia only works that way on television, I suspect amnesia is only a valid excuse on television.
Yeah. I guess, well, it certainly would be quite complex. I guess real life moral philosophy and justice, and everyone hates moral philosophy, is probably saved from having to deal with these quandaries, because I don't think amnesia works quite this way in real life. Like, you don't forget everything and become like a different person. Although I don't know, you may do, but usually plot convenient medical stuff for television is really how it pans out in real life.
I don't know. I have a sneaky suspicion that in real life, if you got amnesia and couldn't remember your crime, you'd still have to do the time.
Yeah.
Assuming you'd been caught. I doubt you'd be let off. Because A, you could be faking, and B, well, mostly A, you could be faking, to be honest. If someone set that precedent, then I suspect the amount of cases of TV amnesia in the real world would suddenly shoot the fucker.
There is that.
Also, I didn't see it, but apparently after a car crash in the S Club 7's Christmas special, Paul gets amnesia, which is later cured by watching another patient at the hospital crash his wheelchair.
All right.
So there you go.
I really didn't think we were going to be going to the S Club 7 TV show in this bit, especially very much the opposite of the Punisher in many ways.
I mean, I don't know whether he was responsible for the car crash or not, but apparently Hannah was left unable to speak correctly for a time due to the crash. S Club 7 sounds a lot grittier than I thought.
Okay, right. Yeah. I didn't realise there was like a car crash episode. All right.
Is amnesia a valid excuse to talk about S Club 7?
Well, if you've got amnesia and you still think it's kind of like 1997 or something. I think one of the best attempts to kind of engage with this is amnesia a valid excuse is probably one of the most recent best examples of amnesia in like a major pop culture series, which is the Bourne films, Bourne Identity and so on, in which what is implied is that, and spoilers for Bourne, I guess now, a film that came out the better part of 20 years ago. Obviously, Jason Bourne has lost his memory and is trying to piece together what his life was before he lost his memory. And what I think you're supposed to take away from that is that pre-memory loss Jason Bourne was not a nice guy. He was an assassin. He went around sort of killing people on orders. I mean, you could think that, like, I know he did it for his country, or the people he'd killed were bad guys. Obviously, the warlord from generic unnamed African country that he sent to kill in the first film is, again, probably not like a good guy, but there's a sense that Bourne was probably not a pleasant person before, and now he doesn't want to go back to being an international assassin and hellraiser. He just wants to live his life. But the problem is the system that created him is coming after him. There's an element of like Bourne is now a new is a new person, and obviously Matt Damon does likable very well. So, the idea is the fact that newborn, after he loses memory, is like a new person and isn't responsible for whatever it was that the old born did. So in that case, I guess they're saying that amnesia is a valid excuse because he is now a brand new person.
True, although they do talk a lot about how horrific it was. But yeah, it's true, films like that, I think Wolverine has a similar problem, do go in hard about the fact that the bloke who has amnesia should now be allowed to go off and live his life.
Yeah.
Although they don't often get to be fair. It usually ends up being some form of tragedy where the sins of their past will eventually rise up and engulf them. Yeah. So it's debatable how much they actually feel amnesia is going to work as an excuse.
Yeah, but I think isn't that the element that culture is trying to say that amnesia is not a valid excuse. You still have to atone for the sins of your past self, even if they were technically done by a different person. That's what they're getting at there, that you still have to, for what it is you did.
Yeah.
Or at least engage with it, I would say. You have to engage with what you did before, because Bourne can't get any peace until he tracks down his old bosses and kills them, because it's the only way he'll ever get to be free. In the second film, he has to hunt down and kill Brian Cox, not the Brian Cox who presents the Infinite Monkey Cage that we discussed at the top of the show, the Scottish Brian Cox, who is an actor. But yeah, the idea that until Bourne must engage with his past in order to seek an escape from it, you cannot just say, I have amnesia, that's my excuse. He has to no, it's not valid. You must engage with your past in order to escape from it.
The only way you can atone for the murders you did for amnesia is to do more murders.
Well, I guess the idea is to track down the people who are ultimately responsible. Like I say, to track down and punish the desk murderers that are actually responsible for all this. The people who are giving the orders, not doing the orders.
Modern pop culture isn't kind to desk owners, is it? No, it seems to very much want us to focus most of our rage on the desk people. Probably deservedly. If you're listening to this and you own a desk, you can go fuck yourself.
I am sitting at a desk right now.
Same.
It's a curved desk, and I generally feel that desk murderers would sit behind like a regular rectangular desk. So I think I'm safe from the Punisher because my desk is curved.
I'm happy to go with that, as for reasons far too boring to list on a podcast, I am sitting behind the exact same desk from IKEA.
Yes, but I think the hatred of desk murderers, I think, stems from the Second World War, and specifically the aftermath of like the Holocaust, and this idea that the worst of all people were not actually the ones following orders, prosecuting the atrocity. It was the people behind the desk that dreamt it up and ordered it.
It's true. I think maybe ultimately where I get my innate dislike of people behind desks ordering murders is probably from Blackadder Goes Forth, which I first saw when I was about 13.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to then. I mean, I guess there's always been people behind desks ordering people to go out and commit mass murderers. I'm sure there's plenty of go back to Roman times, and I don't think like Augustus Caesar was like charging in, sword drawn at the head of his army, although to be fair, I know very little about how that went down that wasn't gleaned from the HBO drama Rome or the BBC's I, Claudius, which is really good. But I do think there is an element of the hatred of desk murderers comes from this idea that when society gets big enough and complicated enough, and we have like industrial processes that can be put into mass murder, that maybe the people who are the tiny cogs in the machine aren't responsible. The people at the top of the pyramid are. Although the Punisher takes the opposite view that everyone's responsible, and I'm going to gun my way up the pyramid right to the top.
Yep, pretty much.
So via S Club 7 and IKEA furniture, we have decided that amnesia is not a valid excuse, or at least not from the Punisher.
I don't think so. I mean, it's weird how amnesia as an excuse seems to mostly come up in these sort of gun-heavy espionage shows. How these seem to be, with the singular exception of S Club 7, the main examples seem to be comedy episodes of Buffy where they temporarily forget who they are and think they're, I don't know, strangers from the 1950s or something. Or espionage shows where the bad gunman has temporarily forgotten he's a bad gunman.
Yeah, I think other notable examples is like The Long Kiss Goodnight, when again the person forgets they're like a super assassin.
Yeah, there's some quite major amnesia elements in Chuck, but Chuck of course is a sort of light send-up of these espionage shows.
Well, the same as The Long Kiss Goodnight.
And Men in Black.
Yeah, that has amnesia in the second one, doesn't it?
There you go. So as long as you steer clear of working in espionage and being entirely fictional, you'll probably be safe from amnesia and therefore not have to worry about whether it's a valid excuse.
Yeah, and you'll probably be safe from the Punisher as well.
The sad part is that's probably the most credible part of this conversation, but that a man might take to the streets with guns to avenge imagined wrongs. But that's okay, we live in Britain, we'll hopefully be safe from that as well.
Yeah, apart from those people in Croydon who dressed up as superheroes to be vigilantes and patrolled the streets. And I think then they get beaten up by some regular criminals.
I think they're more cute rather than terrifying, aren't they? I don't think any of them had an assault rifle.
That's all we have time for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe on your podcatcher of choice so that you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please can you leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, which is moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself. If you go to the website right now, you'll see I have also written an article about the Punisher, drawing on how we see the Punisher as, is he a man? Is he a hero? Is he an icon? Is he a god? Who is the Punisher under that skull t-shirt?
Okay, and of course you can also follow us on social media at MFV Podcast on Twitter, or just search Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. Or you should also be able to do that on Twitter, to be fair. And we will come up and you can hear exciting updates about what we think of some pop culture. And in this case, you can see Alistair's sigh of despair at the prospect of a Lost remake. Which, yeah, it's sad because we probably would still cover it. I've been Nick Bryan. You can follow me on the internet at nickbryan.com or on Twitter at nickmb, where you can hear about such things as my thoughts on pop culture and my new comic Moonframe, which is a sort of sci-fi horror thing with Lucas Peveril and is also available on said website. Thank you.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time, where we will be reviewing the Lego Movie 2, the second piece. Until then, have a good one, and goodbye.
Bye. I'm happy to go with that, as for reasons far too boring to list on a podcast, I am sitting behind the exact same desk from IKEA.
Yes, the curved IKEA desk that fits neatly into the corner of a small room.
Listener, I copied him.
Yeah.
Or rather, I copied myself. But anyway, this is why it's too boring to describe on a podcast.